I would like to call our panelists to the stage. Adomas Audickas, advisor to the Prime Minister from the government of Ukraine. Is Mr. Audickas here? Excellent.
Yes.
Very good to see you. He led the reform of state-owned enterprises in Lithuania as Vice Economy Minister there. And now we have Ihor Burakovsky, head of the board of the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, and Maryana Kahanyak, director of the Export Promotion Office, who was responsible for Ukraine's hugely successful country image and brand building exercise during the Euro 2012 football tournament. We have Makar Paseniuk, managing director of ICU, one of the country's leading investment bankers, who has worked on most of Ukraine's premier transactions, and of course the panel's senior statesman, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, former UK Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary and former chairman of the UK Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee. Welcome to all of our panelists, and if I can start with Adomas. As economy minister in Lithuania, you led the reform of state-owned enterprises there. Apart from the size of the country, why is it so much more difficult to carry out such reforms in Ukraine?
Just one thing, I was a vice minister, not the minister, so you promoted me.
It's always nice to be promoted.
Thank you for this.
Backwards promotion.
You're completely right in terms of scale. Lithuania and Ukraine obviously differs. But one thing regarding scale, what's important to say that Ukrainian state-owned enterprise sector is not as large as sometimes people think. You can find people talking that Ukraine has 3,000 state-owned enterprises, which is not entirely true because most of those companies are not operating. So it's really about 100 companies that are of relatively big size. 100 of those companies, they comprise 90% of all the assets and all the revenue in this sector. So the sector is big, but it's not, it's not Belarus where you have 70% of the economy state-owned sector. Ukrainian state-owned sector is much smaller than this. The other difficulties, if we're not talking about scale, but about other things, compared to Ukraine and Lithuania, is that in Ukraine you have very fragmented politics, and it's very difficult to find a common decision. In parliament you have many parties that are not that big. Usually you have coalition governments, therefore you have to find agreements with them. Then you have president and prime minister powers also distributed. It's not presidential republic, it's not only also a parliamentary republic, it's both at the same time. So it's really difficult to find common political decision on what needs to be done. So this is definitely a factor that differentiates Lithuania. The other difficulty, I would say, is that in Ukraine you have culture of legislation which is very inflexible. If something is not written in law in terms of authorities that are given to the government, it means that the government cannot do that. For example, I remember when we wanted at the very beginning to increase transparency of this sector, and just simply say that all state-owned enterprises need to publish the financial accounts publicly. It was almost impossible to do that because our government lawyer said you have to change the law for this, even though it's such a simple thing. It's public companies, state-owned companies, even more public than public. So obviously the financials should be public. But government did not have authority to mandate state-owned enterprises to make the reports public. It took us some legislative engineering to fight this problem, and we found a solution, and we implemented the solution. But as I say, it's still very, very difficult to find legal authorities of the bodies that managing sometimes certain assets. But notwithstanding all those differences and problems, I still would say that we achieved quite significant results with the reform of state-owned enterprises. Usually it takes long time to reform the sector. It's not 1 year, it's not 2 years. UK also is moving through various transitions on how to manage the state-owned enterprises. It recently just changed the structure, the way UK manages state-owned enterprises. So it's always evolving system. And what we managed to achieve in 4 years, first, we already have professional board of directors in a few state-owned companies with independent directors. By the way, Naftogaz, which is the biggest state-owned company, has a chairwoman, which she is a UK citizen. We also have an American citizen, we also have French citizen on this board sitting. We have other companies that have this really high quality boards.
I don't think anybody doubts the high quality of the people, and people see the reforms, they're documented for everybody to see. We see the economic metrics of Ukraine improving at the same time. But, you know, the same with the fight for corruption. But if we speak to the citizens of Ukraine in the polls, why do people feel things are not moving forward and many actually believe they are getting worse?
It's an excellent question. And I would say that Ukraine is not unique at all in this. People usually don't like structural reforms. And I need to make one step back. I will speak about structural reform, but Ukraine also is affected by this global rise of populism. Due to a fast change, right now scholars debate why we have this trend, but there are many things. You have inequality, you have loss of identity, you have fast change of technological change, and in general the change is so fast that people cannot adapt, and some of them are left behind, so they're angry. So you have this in Ukraine as well. But coming back to structural reforms, it's painful when you add, people usually say, they want to be fit, but to be fit, you have to start running, for example, 10 kilometers every morning. You also have to change your diet, most likely canceling food which is tasty, which is sugary and fatty, to something which is a bit more lean. And it's not nice at the very beginning, and then you see results only after some time. The same with structural reforms. It's painful. For example, let's take a few examples. Reform on pensions. It effectively increased retirement age by 4.5 years. Obviously, it's painful for people. People don't like this kind of things, but it makes budget sustainable and fiscal situation sustainable. Or the other reform, which is, I think, even more painful for people, like increasing gas prices. All international community wants Ukraine to increase gas prices for residential customers to the same level as global prices. By the way, they're already right now around 70% of the global prices. In 2014, they were like 15% of global prices. So of course it's painful for people because prices are increasing and they need to pay this bill. So it's painful. So this is why you have these results, and I think only those politicians that really care for the country, that have technocratic view, they engage in this kind of reforms. Many of the politicians that want to save the political ratings, they would rather not do anything because that allows them to be re-elected.
But I mean, we can't underestimate the progress in the fight against corruption, Professor Burakovsky. If we look at the $5.5 billion lost in fraudulent transactions in just one bank, Privat Bank, between 2006 to 2016, and $8 billion of losses at the state monopoly, Naftogaz, I think in 2014, 6% of GDP. The reforms to get rid of these black holes. Please, can you explain to our audience just how significant and onerous they have been?
Well, the question about corruption is an extremely popular one, and from the other side it's very challenging for anyone to answer in a short way, but I actually will try my best. First of all, I would like to say that when it comes actually to the fight against corruption, we need to discriminate between two dimensions of this fight. One is narrowing space for corruption. It means actually, the changes in the rule of economic games, fiscal games, or actually the rules of economic policy from one side, and from the other side, that's about punishment. And well, I think the situation which happened with the private bank, well, could be explained both by the weaknesses of the national bank, especially well the supervisory function of the national bank, plus of course actually a lot of well corrupted relationship between the officials of the national bank and the private bank people. So it means that well in fact until recently, well, the national bank or the other institutions were used by certain political forces as a kind of tool to actually secure the private economic interests. And when it comes actually well, to our calculations right now, well, Ukraine managed actually to solve a lot of problems. First of all, actually to increase the supervisory role of the control role of the national bank. Ukrainian banking sector was, so to speak, very much, well, I would like to say, well revised, and a lot of actually insolvent banks were either closed voluntarily or non-voluntary. And of course, actually, well, it's not only well about the supervision, well, it's also well about well, the way how the national bank delivers its policy. When it comes actually well, to NAK Naftogaz, well, it seems to me that we have well, people here from NAK Naftogaz, but well, as everybody who knows everything about politics, sport, football, etc., I'm going to also to comment some things about well, NAK Naftogaz. Situation is quite simple. Again, actually, well, NAK Naftogaz was used as a kind of vehicle for some well, private-related schemes. Plus, there was a lot of actually mess in Ukrainian gas market when it comes actually well, to tariff setting procedures. Plus, NAK Naftogaz used to be quite substantial player in public procurement. Well, they were buying tubes, well, etc., etc., etc. And of course, actually, well, that's something which needed quite a substantial restructuring. And well, 2 years in a row, if not mistaken, right now, well, NAK Naftogaz is recording profit. Partly to the internal changes, partly to institutional reform inside Naftogaz, partly due to increase in the gas prices in Ukraine, and actually, well, it benefited well to Naftogaz. So, well, that's a kind of, well, very, very, very short story. But of course, we cannot underestimate, well, the political struggle behind these changes. We need to be actually, well, quite serious that, well, Ukraine started quite, I would like to say, ambitious anti-corruption reform, and right now actually it's necessary to protect this anti-corruption reform and actually to go further on.
But isn't it fair to say, Professor Burakovsky, there are two wars going on in Ukraine? There's the war with Russia in the east, and then there's the war between the oligarchs. I mean, the president and government have talked about a strategic policy of de-oligarchization over the last 4 years to loosen the iron grip which 4 or maybe 5 industrial clans have over the nation's economy. We all know who they are: Mr. Akhmetov, Mr. Kolomoisky, Mr. Firtash, Mr. Pinchuk. They all have representatives here in this room today. They control factories, parliamentary bloc votes, and much of the mass media. Is there any evidence that their influence has in any way been reduced?
I think that actually we could provide well, some evidence. Well, that's about actually well, the restructuring of the management of state-owned enterprises. That's about actually changes in the monetary policy and supervisory policy of the National Bank, of course. I hope that well, privatization campaign will also bring some positive evidence that well, it's about well, market, it's about prices, not about political influences when it comes actually well, to buy something. But again, when we're talking about de-oligarchization and the oligarchs, we need actually well, to divide and actually to discriminate between two things. One thing is kind of political power, and definitely actually if you're a democratic country, well, this political power needs to be well, restructured, needs to be actually well, changed. But from the other side, well, definitely actually, well, these are the major players in a number of Ukrainian sectors, and what's really necessary. We learned quite a hard lesson that a national bank should be politically independent, right? And otherwise, actually, you cannot conduct efficient macroeconomic, better say, well, monetary policy. Right now, we're learning well, another issue, that the anti-monopoly committee needs to be politically independent, and that's about actually, breaking the monopolies, that's about regulating the monopolies, and actually, well, that's about the strategy to avoid what is called well, state capture. At our institution, well, we did well, a couple of calculations, and due to state capture, well, we did it well with our colleagues from the World Bank, actually. Ukraine loses approximately 10% of its potential GDP. So it means that the oligarchization has a quite specific economic price and economic effect.
If I can bring in Makar Paseniuk here, because you see these trends changing as an investor. Do you feel that the chicken kings, the tech titans representing agriculture and technological innovation, will they take over from the old metallurgy masters, the coal kings of the past, in terms of those who dominate Ukrainian industry?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I guess Ukraine has its global advantages, and so it happens that metals and mining sector is one of them, and thus a lot of people that have made their wealth over time in the sector. The trend that we have been seeing over the last 10 years is that agriculture as a percentage of Ukraine's exports has taken over metals and mining sector. Agriculture has taken over as a percentage of exports, and currently is the largest export item in Ukraine, accounting for roughly 41% of total exports, compared to 23% for metals and mining. Definitely, the larger businesses in agriculture have appeared and will continue to appear. I want technology to be one of the core sectors driving the economy, but unfortunately, despite tremendous growth that we have seen and continue seeing, it's not there yet as in terms of size. But definitely there would be groups, and there are groups that have become global and contributing. So to summarize my answer, I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but definitely, just like in the rest of the world, the new modern sectors grow and contribute more and more to GDP and create more and more wealth, and thus the influence of people behind it will grow as well. But the metals and mining, for the time being, will not disappear overnight. But I fully agree with Ihor in terms of things that have been taken to address the oligarchization of the economy. It's all about the regulatory framework. And yes, it may be painful, but the moment you establish market-based rules for those businesses which happen to be owned by people known as oligarchs, their advantage tends to disappear or diminish.
But does it somehow provide false comfort, Makar, for us to think that these new tech industries and the agriculture, it's somehow less problematic than the old smokestack industries? Because if we look at the story of Maryana Agro Holdings, for instance, it's been a typically cautionary Ukrainian business tale with all the colourful ingredients of the rich black soil, underestimated risks, organised fraud from with money taken from foreign investment funds, with suspects appearing on Interpol wanted list. What's been your involvement in the latest twist of this story? How can you manage to make such an investment profitable, and what can we learn from these experiences?
Well, I would say that Maryana and a couple of similar cases are rotten apples in the pile. And anywhere cases like that do exist, not only in Ukraine and not only in agriculture. Maryana, for those of you who are not familiar, is a Ukrainian agri-company that has accessed global capital markets and bank lending, and has raised roughly $1.2 billion from all kinds of creditors and a little bit from equity investors. But instead of being a genuine agribusiness, turned out to be a fraudulent company that has been cooking its books for a long time. 3 years ago, it was taken over with our help, and we and Rothschild Investment Bank advised the creditors on resolving the situation. Roughly 3 years ago, it was taken over by the creditors that have gone through the process of negotiating among themselves and finding a resolution. The former shareholders are on the run, and as Yuri mentioned, are on the Interpol list. Quite recently, the creditors of the company decided to sell the company to a strategic investor called Salik, which is a Saudi Arabian group, which is active in Europe and in the agricultural sector in particular. But what it does, I mean, I think it's not only about Maria, it's about the whole resolution mechanism, and it's about since we're talking about reforms, it's about the difference that reforms in the judicial sector have achieved. 3 years of litigation in Ukrainian courts, and in Cyprus, in a lot of many other jurisdictions, have helped the creditors to achieve that. But I think what's more important is that the Ukrainian part of the process, which coincided with the judicial reform that was in the process of being implemented, where hundreds, if not thousands, of judges were weeded out from the system, has yielded the reform, has yielded the results, and all of our clients were pleasantly surprised, so to say, in what they were able to achieve in Ukraine. In terms of resolution, I think cases like that do happen and will continue to happen, unfortunately, because this is business. But it set a very important precedent where effectively the creditors were able to get their own justice. Yes, they lost money, obviously. But what it did, it allowed to save thousands of jobs in Ukraine. It allowed the company and, again, the Ukrainian economy to get fresh capital, which will continue to flow into the story as Salik Group will be expanding the business, because the way they look at it is just a starting platform. And I think overall it's positive for Ukraine's image in the investment community. It's good for Ukraine in terms of being able to attract strategic investors of the stature of Salik Group. And each cloud has a silver lining.
But I'm sure there are also much more positive stories of your investment portfolio you can tell us about.
Well, I think overall, if you look at, I'm as an ex-banker, or ex-investment banker, that has done roughly 60% of all transactions in capital markets that came out of Ukraine. I can say that most of the transactions out of Ukraine were positive. The companies are still around. Yes, they have had difficult times. Especially after the macro events of 2008 or after the geopolitical events of 2014. They went through the process, restructured their obligations, but still on the good side of the radars of global investment community. In terms of returns, Ukraine has showed overall, if you take a longer holding period of time, has showed quite decent returns for both debt and equity holders. In terms of our recent investments as a group, we started looking at alternative energy sector, where we are co-investing with one of the US-based hedge funds. And the amounts of those investments are quite substantial. And we have started supporting the growing tech sector, where we have invested and continuing to invest into one of the IT startups, which has a, if not global, then at least you know, international footprint, especially active in North America. This is a company called PetCube, which produces feeders and cameras for the pets. And
so this allows you to speak to your dog, have conversations with your dog,
with your dog,
Instagram
play with your dog,
accounts for pets, Facebook profiles.
Absolutely. You know, we're waiting when it can be expanded to your employees and the wives, but you know, now it's past.
Well, I mean, we've heard a lot in this country recently about running through fields of wheat, and if I can bring in Maryana here, obviously Ukraine has this strong agricultural heritage, the breadbasket of the world, as it was called, and I mean, Ukraine is a top producer still of sunflowers, of wheat and other commodities. Do you think we need to encourage more processing of these raw commodities close to the ports in terms of encouraging production of sunflower oil, bread, cheese, etc., so it's not just about export of the raw commodities?
Well, indeed, Ukraine is the #1 sunflower oil producer and exporter, and I think we should be proud of it, because like right now I have a feeling that we have to be kind of apologetic about what we export. Why not, you know, talk to every person in this room saying that, you know, your bacon for this breakfast was fried on Ukrainian oil? Of course, you know, what you have to understand about Ukraine is that Ukraine is changing. You know, it's an ongoing process. People are changing, and I would say that one of the most, you know, unbelievable reform that I am seeing myself is the change of attitude. The change how people think, the change how Ukrainian businesses, exporters are changing. Like today I'm here, first of all, to present to you our Ukrainian business delegation that came here in 1 month. 1 month before this event, we announced it, and 12 companies are here in this room ready to communicate and to negotiate contracts with UK partners and importers. So, you know, of course, we are very much interested in encouraging more added value products and processed food, but it's changing. It will take some time. And of course, these bigger figures are more visible, but still there are a lot of companies that are already interested in the market. And what is very important is for us, Ukrainians, as a country and as exporters, to communicate. We're here today also to communicate about what we have to offer to the market, what we have to offer to the world.
Well, let me give you one example, Maryana. All of us who have lived and spent some time in Ukraine, we all know that Ukrainian foods and cuisine are some of the tastiest in the world. Yet there are very few Ukrainian shops, almost none in London, where you can buy frozen vareniki, for instance, Ukrainian honey, Ukrainian garlic sausage, the wonderful korona, Ukrainian chocolate. The world is being deprived of these foodstuffs. How can we promote their export and create new markets for them? They're invisible outside Ukraine.
Well, that's maybe the question of, you know, marketing and branding. I don't know, maybe we should have a special program of making sure that every capital, you know, every country has a Ukrainian shop, because usually even Ukrainian products are being sold in Polish shops. There is still some Ukrainian products. Well, you know, I think we should really be more proactive in foreign markets. Ukrainian companies should be more proactive in exhibitions, in B2Bs, in different instruments that would help them to organize the sales channels. And in terms of shops, maybe, I don't know, I saw today the president of Ukrainian World Congress, maybe we should ask them to also support Ukraine in this, just by creating the platforms for this. You know, maybe we should organize some kinds of online platform already for this type of promoting Ukrainian products. Because, you know, I agree with you that, you know, in order to buy, it has to be accessible and it has to be really comfortable for you to go and find this product.
If I can put you on the spot, Maryana, you've worked for PR companies. You've come up with slogans and brands to market various goods. Danilo Bilak, I think he's here, he's worked on the Silicon Step brand for Ukraine to promote this synthesis between agriculture and technology. What is the image you would like to create for Ukraine's agricultural products and foodstuffs?
Well, you know, indeed, Ukraine, for the first time, I think in history, has managed to launch the common brand, which is Ukraine Now, and it has been really a long and complicated process with many stakeholders involved. And I would say that I would like to underline the, you know, efforts from the Ministry of Information Policy and its State Secretary Artem Bidenko, and all the stakeholders that really united to make this one message from Ukraine, which is Ukraine Now. And actually, it was also developed with the help of UK experts who developed the Britain is Great campaign for Great Britain. And I would like to not communicate only from the agriculture or from the food processing industry, but I would like to communicate from products and services exported from Ukraine. We just launched 2 weeks ago and the export brand with its main and very simple but yet clear message. It's called Trade with Ukraine. We would like Ukrainian products and services to be accepted as, of course, high quality, as of course, especially when it comes to food, as natural, and of course as this that, you know, people can really feel and enjoy.
And I'd like to bring in Sir Malcolm on this point, because we're curious to know the view of the British establishment when it comes to Ukraine as an entity, as an economic entity, as a political entity. You were very influential in shaping Mrs. Thatcher's policy towards the Soviet Union, yet the Foreign Office, I remember, refused to have a Ukrainian translator for the Prime Minister when she visited Kiev in June 1990, insisting that her remarks would be translated only to and from Russian. She called Kievan Rus one of the first Russian states, and she called Kiev the mother of Russian cities. Bearing in mind that much of the British establishment did not want the Soviet Union to break up, at what stage did you in the Foreign Office and the government begin to see Ukraine as its own economic and political entity?
Well, thank you for a nice, easy question to start off with. Let me just, first of all, say I was not involved in the Foreign Office at that particular time, but I'm going to respond to the point you raised, because it's an important point. You said that Britain, and the same could be said of George Bush and the United States, were not terribly keen on an independent Ukraine back in 1990. And there was a difference of view. Theirs wasn't the only view. But the main concern was not whether Ukraine deserved to be independent or could turn into a fantastic country. The main concern was nuclear weapons. That because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Belarus inherited all the nuclear weapons that had been on their territory. And at that time, the person in Moscow was Boris Yeltsin, who was working very closely with the West and who was seen as a responsible leader, after Gorbachev, also two people who had worked very constructively. Now, no one had the faintest idea who was going to come to power in an independent Ukraine, and whether these nuclear weapons could be a source of threat or could be resolved peacefully. And that is the reason why, not just Mrs. Thatcher, when the first President Bush came to Kiev, he made a speech to the Rada. This is before Ukraine was independent.
The chicken
Kiev speech, because he encouraged them to think twice before going for independence. Now, that's now ancient history. That is now ancient history. And all I can say is that both for the United Kingdom and I'm sure for the United States, there is an overwhelming, and I use my words carefully because I've mixed with diplomats. And if I say overwhelming, I mean it. An overwhelming commitment to the independence and progress of Ukraine. And that's been true for 20. I've been to Ukraine 5 times since I first went as Defense Secretary in 1992. And I've seen with my own eyes the extraordinary changes that have taken place. Can I just comment, if I may, on the earlier discussion?
Please do, please do.
Because there's a particular point I wanted to raise which hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think with the business community, particularly important. And incidentally, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could never have filled this hall with people, these number of people interested in the possibilities of trade and business in Ukraine. You would have had to hire a very much smaller room for a conference of this kind. So that's indicative. But the point I wanted to make is much of the earlier discussion, in answer to your questions, has been about corruption. And corruption, of course, is a hugely serious problem, not just in Ukraine, but in probably the majority of the countries of the world. And it is an evil, and it has to be dealt with. I don't want to comment more on that, other than to say that I agreed with what had been said. But from the point of view of the business community, not just in Britain, but in most countries, the decision whether to trade and to invest with another country, they don't like corruption, they wish it would go away. It makes it more difficult. But because there's corruption in so many countries, it will not necessarily prevent a decision to invest. What is actually at least as important, and in some cases more important, is whether the country concerned respects what is called the rule of law. And that is of huge importance to any company, particularly including British companies, that are thinking of investing or trading in Ukraine, because they want to be satisfied that if over the years that they're involved, if there is a dispute, either with the Ukrainian government or with some Ukrainian company or oligarch, who's going to resolve that dispute? Is it going to be resolved by an independent judiciary with independent judges looking purely at the facts of the case, or will they be nobbled? Will they be themselves corrupted or controlled by the government concerned? Now, can I just give an example, very briefly, because I know I don't want to take up too much time. When I was Foreign Secretary, I was involved in the last stage of the negotiations of Hong Kong going back to China. And once when I had to go to Beijing to see the Chinese Foreign Minister, the people in Hong Kong who I'd seen a few days earlier said, please raise with him that when we become part of China, we're not just interested in whether we'll have more than one candidate to vote for in an election, but will we still enjoy the rule of law? And I put this to the Chinese Foreign Minister, and I've never forgotten his reply. He said, through the interpreter, he said, don't worry, Mr. Rifkind. We in China, we too believe in the rule of law. In China, the people must obey the law. And I said, now hold on a moment. When we're talking about the rule of law, it's not just the people who must be under the law, it's the government must be under the law. If the courts rule that the government's trying to do something illegal, not only should that be possible, but the government should respect that judgment. And he not only didn't agree with what I was saying, he hadn't the faintest idea what I was talking about. And somebody summed it up rather well. Very final point, that both in China and in Putin's Russia, you don't have the rule of law, you have rule by law. In those countries, they do use the legal system, but to protect their own power and to punish or prevent those who would challenge it. So the real choice, and Ukraine's on the right side of the border there, is do you pursue the rule of law or do you rule by law? That's the Chinese, the Russian alternative, and all credit to Ukraine that that's not the route they're choosing.
I think, Sir Malcolm, that's an absolutely fundamental point to today's discussions. And as you know, it was the main reason all the hundreds of thousands of protesters came out onto the streets in 2014. It was a pro-European protest, but they wanted a higher court that they have recourse to in terms of the rule of law, in terms of property rights, people having their small businesses raided, their flats taken away by other properties, by the regime then, and but now the Ukrainians are they came out in those protests. They're left in something of a conundrum now. People sacrificed their lives for this and for this European dream. And when the Minister Alan Duncan and former PM David Cameron last year, they appeared at a trade and economic conference in Kiev, and they tried to persuade the Ukrainian business and political elites to move closer to the European Union, embrace European laws, European norms. The speeches were greeted with gasps of incredulity from the audience who are monitoring the UK's Brexit path. How can Ukrainians really believe what the Ukrainian authorities are, what the UK authorities are telling them about following a pro-EU path in business and politics when they're doing just the opposite themselves?
It's not so irrational as you're implying. The question of Ukraine's relationship with the European Union is not for Britain to decide, it's for Ukraine to decide, and the European Union. And Ukraine has a long-standing ambition to become a member of the European Union. And before then, to be as close as possible, through trade agreements and other ways, as fast as the EU itself will permit, to move towards integration, like so many other countries in Eastern Europe or Central Europe have done. So the British government has no problem with that. We've taken our own national decision, which is closer to Switzerland or Norway, that we think our future destiny is not in the EU, but working closely with it. But you know, some of the people who are hostile to the European Union around the world, dare I say it, even in the White House, assumed that Britain would be only too delighted if the EU collapsed, or if the Eurozone collapsed, disintegrated. The answer is we would not. In fact, quite the opposite. We want the EU to succeed, not just out of goodwill, but because the health of Europe as a whole, and in particular the economic health of so many countries, would, if not collapse, certainly be very severely damaged if the Eurozone or the EU was to disintegrate. And Britain itself would suffer as a result of that. All countries would, but Britain as a major trader with the EU would greatly suffer. So it's not irrational, the advice that David Cameron appears to have been giving. It's entirely consistent with what is common sense, actually, on this matter.
So as somebody with his ear very close to the ground of the Brexit negotiations, what do you predict to be the likely outcome and its implications for trade relations between the UK and Ukraine, Sir Malcolm?
The safest prediction I would make is that the future is not what it used to be. But if I can try and be a little bit more helpful. I mean, the honest answer is I don't know, because we're in this crunch stage when it could go all sorts of different ways. But I think in the last few days, I'm seeing what I think may be emerging as the end game that might lead to some sort of deal. And if at the moment I was saying what seems to be the most likely outcome, only the most likely, because we can't go beyond that assumption, I think what both sides are looking at, both from a view to the trading relationship and to deal with this problem of the Irish border, is that after the United Kingdom leaves the EU, which is in March next year, if there's agreement, there is then a transitional period where nothing very much changes for about a year and a half. And that what is then being considered is a temporary customs union, which would mean that the sort of seamless border issue would be resolved over the next couple of years while the detailed trade negotiations continued. Because it's agreed by everyone that even if there's a political agreement in the next few weeks that enables a treaty to be signed, a lot of work will still need to be done on trade. And you've got to have a period of time in which to do that. Now, there is a downside here, and let me just mention it so the audience understands why this is a pretty sensitive issue. One of the main aspirations of what we call the hard Brexiteers, the Boris Johnsons and people like that, was always that when we leave the European Union, we will be able to have free trade agreements with third countries. And of course, Ukraine is a very significant country, and I agree with what Tom said earlier. You're absolutely right to emphasize the huge potential benefit to both countries if progress can be made on this. Now, you can only have a free trade agreement if you can ultimately implement it. And as long as Britain is in a customs union, that is very difficult, if not impossible, because a customs union will normally have a common external tariff. So, concluding point, What was interesting in some of the press reporting yesterday was that some of the sort of hard Brexiteers were saying, well, we could live with a customs union as long as it was temporary, as long as it was just for 2 or 3 years, and the timing that was being mentioned was not later than our next general election, which is due in 2022. That's about 4 years from now. So that may be the beginning of the 2 points of view coming together. Who knows? Next week I'll explain why I got it wrong.
Well, thank you very much for those brave predictions. I'd like to throw this open to the audience now. If anybody has some questions, there's a gentleman on the table here. I think a microphone should be on its way to you. So the gentleman on the table, please could you state your name and company or organization before you ask your question?
Hi, I'm Carlo Caiani, Switzerland. I'm Harvest Agricultural Fund. So we invest in farms and agriculture in Australia, New Zealand, different parts. I've just come back pretty much from living in Asia for the last 20 years. China 5, India 3, Japan 4, Singapore 3. China can't get reliable food. They don't trust their food they make. It's a massive issue. The rich and richer, money is no question. They can't trust their food because their chickens and pigs are full of steroids, antibiotics, you name it, to enhance the growth features, and too difficult to control and manage. The water is a problem, soil is a problem, salinity, and you name it. China's really massively hungry for the best food it can get. So I see a massive opportunity not only for import replacement from the Ukraine to the UK, but what does the UK signify in China? So there's 320,000 Chinese studying in the UK right now, and that's been like that for the last 10, 15 years. They all go back to China, and they say one thing about the UK, you can trust the UK. They've got integrity. They don't lie, they don't cheat. It's not half organic, quarter organic, it means organic. You try getting certified organic in this country, it is really organic. So what I put to Ukraine is this. Ukraine, you have the fabulous soil, great water, wonderful agriculture. UK have fabulous integrity, wonderful branding, and great supply chain. Have you ever thought how many flights there are from Heathrow into China every day, every week, into 10 cities? That will double in the next 10 years. China has 1.4 billion population. They really exasperate, can't get enough pork, beef, chicken, vegetable oil, you name it. Bottom line is this. There is a massive opportunity for UK and Ukraine agriculture and businesses to combine, joint venture. So at the end of the day, UK and Ukraine have joint ventures not only for import replacement into the UK, but more importantly to export to the massive market into Asia. Use UK integrity and reliability of supply chains fabulous, and use agriculture, especially in certain sectors, incredible in the Ukraine. Black soil, etc. So it's massive. Just Australia, to give it you an example, 20 years ago hardly exported anything to China. This year, $6.8 billion worth of agriculture from Australia into China, and that's increasing at 10% per year. New Zealand, just Fonterra, one dairy company, is $2.7 billion into China. So it's a massive opportunity. Trouble is the Chinese don't know very much about Ukraine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have the Deputy Minister of Agriculture here in the audience. Would you perhaps like to comment on the statement that the gentleman made?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe just a really short reflection. Thank you for this statement. We are well aware of the opportunities which align in Asia, not only in China, by the way, because we are talking there about other markets, including Vietnam, including Japan, Singapore, etc. And I can only actually confirm what you said, what been said in this statement is that there are a lot of untapped opportunities, not only for the Ukrainian agri-food businesses, but for Ukrainian and UK agri-food businesses, and not only agri-food businesses, but again, for the businesses from other subsectors, which can be actively included in this in the building of the global value-added chains, actually. Let us name this so, because we are talking here about the IT, we are talking here about logistics infrastructure, etc. A lot of packaging, a lot of other subsectors and fields of work. So, yes, we are working already quite actively on the Asian direction, but what you've mentioned here, this maybe integration of the existing already mark or what UK globally has as a country, what UK producers and companies enjoy globally, again, as a reputation, etc., plus the opportunities which are now arising more and more in Ukrainian businesses, including agri-food again, and or agricultural technologies, etc. Yes, we should more closely maybe look on the practical ways how we can combine both these advantages, because to tell the truth, we will talk later on agricultural panel on that, but I'm a little bit tired of hearing about Ukrainian agricultural potential and about great Ukrainian black soils. Ukraine not about that anymore. We are a little bit different country at the moment, so, but let's discuss it later. Thank you.
So I apologise about my earlier comment about black soil, but you know, the thing is, when you go to my garden in Ealing in West London, when it's just it's just crumbs, and it just all falls apart. And when I see my cousins in Ukraine, and you can plant anything and it grows, it never fails to astound me. Maryana, you wanted to comment?
I would like to comment that basically what you are proposing is to marry Ukrainian opportunities with UK brand. That means that we have to do a better job as Ukrainian, again, communicating about who we are, what we have to offer. And in terms of China, I would like just to comment that this year, I would say for the first time in 27 years, Ukraine is participating with the national stand in the China International Import Expo. There are 80 countries participating in this. I'm not sure about the UK, but Ukraine is part of this exhibition. And this is our opportunity to tell more about what we have to offer. Of course, unsurprisingly, agro and food processing is one of the biggest part of this exhibition because they are proactive. There is a huge interest from business. They want to do it. They unite. They bring more and more companies and opportunities on the market. But it's not only about this. It will be much broader. So if anyone is going to be there, we're inviting for our national stand.
Do we have another question from the audience? Lord Risby.
Richard Risby. I chair the British Ukrainian Society. I think there are just 2 points, Yuri, I wanted to make. The first one is there has been great concern in Ukraine amongst Ukrainians about the judiciary and the role of the judiciary. And we've now had a very important change now, which is that the role of the president in terms of appointing judges has changed. This is a very important moment because the linkage in the eyes, whether reality was something or not, is now changed. And this is an important moment. The second thing I just wanted to say in respect of economic cooperation, I happen to be one of the Prime Minister's trade envoys. Whatever one says about having direct trade relationships, I know that the competition under the umbrella of the European Union, there's nothing to stop Britain or anybody else having a trade relationship that is very strong, even if there isn't a trade relationship directly written down under that particular umbrella. So whatever happens in terms of the European Union and our relationship, there's no reason why the bilateral trade shouldn't continue to grow as it does in many other parts of the world.
Professor Burakovsky, would you like to comment on the role of the judiciary in Ukraine?
Well, I would like to say that definitely, actually, when it comes to the major key fields where we need accelerating the reforms, well, that's about tax administration, customs, That's about judiciary, and also well, that's about our infrastructure in general way. Because actually, without transportation, without infrastructure, it's really difficult to do good business. I just would like to give one comment on China, and then actually come back to judiciary reform. Now, the problem is that actually Ukraine has been trying quite actively to penetrate to China market, and definitely the China market is extremely fast growing. It's a kind of a point of gravity in international economics, but we have one political problem, and this political problem is called Russian Federation. The problem is that a couple of years ago, Russia suspended the free transit of Ukrainian goods, and definitely right now we have the problems of the logistics in terms of moving Ukrainian goods from Russian territory to China. We tried actually to invent some alternative, some bypassing routes, but unfortunately it's not so easy. So maybe my colleague Mr. Andelian will tell some details about this thing. So this is point number one. And of course actually point number two, when it comes actually to Ukraine and potential cooperation. So right now in Ukrainian agricultural sector, we practically have all the major international players. So it means that actually, it gives an opportunity for different types of strategic alliances, different types of approaches in terms of exploiting not only the market of the European Union, the market of UK, but also the market of China, some African states, Arabic states, why not actually tell about it. When it comes to the judiciary, that's really the problem. That's really the problem. I'm not going actually to enumerate the issues related to the reform. I think that actually, in terms of a regulatory environment, two things are very important. First one is actually, the final decision to implement in full scale the single window on Ukrainian customs. It's very important for the businesses actually in terms of, dealing with one and only agent of the state on the things. And the other one is actually, I hope it will take place immediately with the switch to the use of the status of authorized economic operators. So it gives an opportunity for Ukrainian, not only Ukrainian companies, which will be more swift and more efficient in dealing with the customs issues. Judiciary, again, it's number one. It's number one problem in Ukraine, and actually, potentially, we have a lot of things done. But from the other side, from my point of view, actually, we have two reforms where we have quite intensive counteraction from the side of different, so to say, stakeholders. One is judicial reform, and the other one is medical reform. Judicial reform refers to everybody, to business, to the people, to etc., etc. And medical reforms also actually touches the interests of everybody. So in this case, actually, we need help. We need a kind of cooperation. And I think that actually, the British system of law, or some British experience, could be a great source of enlightenment in a way actually for our judicial reform, but at the same time, as it was rightly said, actually we are trying to invite the British specialists to the councils of the enterprises to participate in different procedures in terms of selecting judges, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, or fortunately, this process requires some time. And when we started some reforms, like the reform of judiciary, like the reform of the anti-corruption bodies, definitely we have a high expectation from the side of the society, a high expectation from the side of our international partners, but we need actually to do our best to fine-tune these institutions and to do it as soon as possible. Thank you.
And Adomas, you wanted to come in from the perspective of somebody who's worked in both the EU and in Ukraine.
So the question is?
This is the question. I thought you wanted to comment on the bilateral agreements.
No, I think what I would like to comment is what our panel discussed a lot about reforms, and we discussed about some specific reforms, and in general, I think what makes sense maybe just to summarize what's been happening in Ukraine, so that we can understand what's happening in Ukraine, where the country goes, and what type of opportunities we have. Look, progress of any country is a race, because you're racing with other countries. Some countries started the race a long time ago. Ukraine started 4 years ago. So definitely it's still behind many European countries, and it needs to catch up. But what's the most important here is pace at which Ukraine runs, not where it is right now. Because we can discuss a lot that Ukraine lacks many things, but what's next? What do we do with this? I think what we need to understand, again, pace, and we need to understand whether this pace the pace will be continued, especially after elections. So you discussed about rule of law. Sir Malcolm discussed about rule of law. I do agree. I think this is the critical function of the state. Without this, you'll not be able to solve any oligarchization issues, any corruption issues. People like to say that, you know, some countries have bad culture, this way you cannot change them. In my opinion, it's completely think of incentives. If you have bad incentives in the economy, you will have bad results. And rule of law makes things in order so that, you know, if you do bad things, you're punished. You do good things, you are rewarded. So rule of law, this is the tool on how to achieve that. In terms of market-based rules, Ukraine already has pretty good legislation. Enforcement needs to be strengthened. So it's prosecutor office and also judicial. With this system, we have two routes right now. One is anti-corruption infrastructure, which is anti-corruption agency and anti-corruption court, which will be created. Anti-corruption court will be created in the beginning of next year. We already have anti-corruption agency. This is a small infrastructure that will be tackling big corruption cases. And then you have another route, changing all legislative system. And it takes time, as Professor Alde said, but right now we already have 1/3 of judges left. All judges, they left already the system. You have attestation system, which is so robust that many European countries don't have this kind of attestation system. You have increase in wages for judges. Right now, Ukraine has ratio 20:1 in terms of average wage in the economy and wage to judges, while European average is around 1:2 for common judges and for highest court judges 1:4. So Ukraine already did a lot here. Still, we need to wait for results. They are not here yet, but we hope that soon they will come. If you take, for example, gas market, which is very painful for Ukraine because you used to have corruption on imports of Russian gas to Ukraine. You no longer have this. Also, you have, in terms of energy efficiency, Ukraine used to consume 60 billion cubic meters of gas. Right now it's 32. Imports reduced from 44 in 2011 to 14 billion cubic meters. This is massive.
Nobody's opening the windows anymore when they want the room to cool down.
Not everyone, definitely. We see from results. Partly the savings are because of Donbass region, because we're not counting this into statistics, but partly is because of energy savings. So massive transformations happening in the country. Look, for example, at fiscal situation. Pension reform that was passed last year. Nobody heard about this kind of things in Ukraine before. You have pension reform, you have healthcare reform, and healthcare reform talks about a lot of things, but one of the main things is how to finance the system. So this is more sustainable. It will be painful because in the future, quality of services will increase, but part of the hospitals, unfortunately, will be closed, so it will be painful. You have education reform, which is also about financing, on how to finance education system that is more sustainable. And I can talk about many things in terms of what really happens in Ukraine and what hard data you have. So the pace, in my opinion, looking from outside, is massive, especially comparing with European countries.
I can see you're a master of statistics. And,
but very quickly, just to conclude, I think I can't remember the name of the gentleman
from Switzerland,
who talks
from
about
the investment fund.
About opportunities with China. I think what we should discuss here is not only relationships Ukraine and UK and having some imports or exports from Ukraine to UK, but UK companies can go and invest in Ukraine, and they're bringing knowledge, they're bringing networks, they're bringing contacts, and in Ukraine you have people that know how to grow things properly. Plus, you can invest into processing of foods. 70% of all the soft commodities are exported.
So it's
you can process them there.
There.
But I think what we have bad about Ukraine, first is I think image, that in Ukraine it's impossible to do business, which is wrong, because if you see Cargill, Louis Dreyfus, ADM, all of the companies do operate there. And the other thing, Russia, people think that because of this military conflict, possibly part of the Ukraine maybe is occupied,
Sadly,
which
we
is not
can't
true.
get rid of the nosy neighbours.
It's 5%.
The noisy neighbours.
It's
Yeah,
5%, and if you arrive to
We
Kiev,
try
and
to pacify them.
many of you, I believe, visited Kiev, but those that have not, please come and see, how vibrant is the city and how vibrant is society.
Open invitation to come and stay
Of course.
at Adomas' place. We've got one final question from the lady here. Please state your name and organisation.
Hi, it's Natalia Johnson with Some Capital Limited. Very quick comment. Observations from business, which I think will be transferred to building country reputation and success. Every successful business person globally know one secret: 10 challenge into opportunity, and you will be very successful. We talk in abundance about Russian Federation. We talk in abundance about lack of rule of law, very bad court system, a lot of things to be changed, but life is moving, life is going on. People born, people die, people marry, people divorce, become richer, Apply simple, basic, I think, business secret/talent. Focus on positivity, focus on what Ukraine has to offer, and Ukraine has to offer a lot. I'm talking as a British of Ukrainian origin. I spent my childhood and my uni years in Ukraine. I spent 14 years among London, Boston, and Constance in Germany. Just observation, you observe how people do things. Ukraine has a lot of quality. Make amazing dish. You have a person on a panel responsible for branding. Ukraine has a lot to show, just show it, please.
Thank you very much for those comments. And we've got
Three more questions.
Okay, I want to take them all in one go. Those questions, and please keep them very brief. The gentleman here first.
Volodymyr Yakubovsky, law firm Nobles in Ukraine. I have a question to the panel, but mostly to Makar and Maryana, because they deal with foreign investors. What is your major number one tip to foreign investors who would like to considering investing in Ukraine?
Okay, and the gentleman here in the grey, please, there. Very brief. That was an excellent one-sentence question.
Thank you. Artem Shurkozhukhov, EBRD. Given that Ukraine is entering electoral campaign next year, how certain are you that the reform zeal will continue, regardless of who occupies the number one office in the country and the parliamentary configuration? Thank you.
And one more final question from Bate.
Yes, this is to Professor Burakovsky. You produced a report, I believe, this year on Ukraine's success in fighting corruption. Everyone talks about the continuing problem. And there is a problem, but actually Ukraine has made huge success eliminating intermediation in gas, which reduced corruption by about 6 or 7 billion, creating a system for the open and transparent awarding of government contracts. Perhaps you could say a few words on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Burakovsky. Very brief comments on the end of the intermediation, well, we hope, in the gas industry.
Well, I would like to be as short as possible. Well, here is a kind of a part of presenting something. Well, the lady asked us to present something, so I'm going to present for this report. Well, it would be distributed at the registration desk. So that's about actually the issues we successfully solved. That's about, well, the ban on intermediation in Ukrainian relations between Gazprom and Naftogaz, point number one. Point number two, that's about actually, well, the revision of the rules on gas market. That's about the public procurement. New system introduced with advantages, disadvantages, with the problem, but still it's working more or less. Well, that's about actually, well, the economic effect of open data strategy implemented in Ukraine, and actually, well, some other things. And my point, well, the next point is that definitely, actually, we are at the very beginning of the road in terms of combating corruption. So it means that actually I do hope that all this course would be enhanced, it would be intensified, and it would be continued after the presidential and parliamentary elections. I do hope that actually there won't be any kind of negative revenge in Ukrainian politics in year 2019, but of course actually, well, I think that, well, the presidential elections are very important, maybe not because of the scope of the functions of the president, it's rather limited right now if you take the Ukrainian constitution, but maybe, well, that's about the influence upon the further parliamentary elections. And they think that Ukrainian people are wise enough actually to support those who would continue the course of the reforms, irrespective of the hardship and the problem. But at the same time, well, definitely we all like, well, to live wealthy, to live healthy, and to do it well right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Makar, number one tip for foreign investors?
Well, don't read a lot of international press and especially Ukrainian press, because Ukraine has done a great job in underselling and shorting itself over the last 5 years. Be open-minded and be vocal, because it looks like even by the representation here, there are a number of people that do care about Ukraine's future, young people that want to make it, a different, a better place, and want to make a difference themselves. So 3 tips in 1.
And final word to Sir Malcolm, the question about the presidential election, that there's a potential that reforms which we've struggled with for so many years and succeeded in can potentially be undone, especially if a new president promises a peace treaty with Russia, which may involve some kind of compromise over relations with the EU, for instance.
Well, one of the prices you pay for an open, free, democratic society is you don't know for certain who the government's going to be a year from now. And Winston Churchill famously said democracy is the worst system of government apart from all the other kinds. And the great strength of Ukraine, whatever the downside may be, and there are downsides in our political system, but the great strength is that the people of Ukraine, not just on one, but on several occasions, have decided it's time for another president. But they can equally decide, we approve of this president, we hope he continues for another term. It's the sovereign right of the people of Ukraine to decide that. They have no similar right in Moscow at this moment in time. That's the great tragedy of Russia under Putin.
Thank you very much, Sir Malcolm. And I'm not going to take my shoe off and bang it on the table, Khrushchev style, but I must be slightly authoritarian now and ask you to join us for the networking coffee break for 25 minutes in the famous Savoy River Room. But thank you all for some fantastic questions, some great debate. Please put your hands together for our panellists, for Adomas, Professor Ihor, Maryana, Makar and Paseniuk.